The scent of roasted coffee mingled with the crisp December air as I sat by the frosted window of the small-town cafe. Outside, twinkle lights wrapped the bare trees, their glow reflected in the thin layer of ice along the sidewalk. Across from me, my son adjusted his jacket while his wife smoothed an invisible crease on her beige turtleneck. Her smile was as polished as ever, bright, rehearsed, and impossible to read. Then, without warning, she said it. "You won't be coming for Christmas." The words floated between us like a shard of ice. I felt the room tighten, the chatter of nearby tables fade, the steam from my untouched cappuccino curl silently upward. My son shifted uncomfortably, but offered no defense. For years I had hosted every holiday, cooked every meal, carried every expense. And now, with a single sentence, I was dismissed, as though decades of quiet devotion could be erased by a polite smile. The bell over the cafe door jingled as I stepped into the brittle winter air. Snowflakes swirled like pale confetti against a steel-gray sky, catching in the folds of my scarf. The world outside bustled with ordinary cheer, children tugging sleds across the icy street, shop windows dressed in garlands and glittering sale signs. But each sound, the carols leaking from a bakery, the crunch of salt under hurried shoes, arrived muffled, as if I were walking through a glass tunnel where only my thoughts could follow. I kept my eyes on the uneven sidewalk, careful with each step. Behind me, my son and his wife walked quickly, their reflections flashing across storefront windows. She leaned toward him, speaking in a low, urgent voice I couldn't catch, her polished boots slicing through the slush. He nodded without looking back. A used bookstore sat at the corner, a large sign taped to its frosted window. Moving sale, 60% off. Once, I would have stopped to browse, maybe pick up a novel to share at Christmas. Today, the sight of the closing shop felt like an omen. Things end quietly, I thought. Traditions fade, bonds loosen, and one morning you wake to discover you've been written out of the story you spent years keeping alive. I paused beneath a street lamp wrapped in tired strands of tinsel. Through the glass of the bookstore, a young clerk stacked boxes with careless energy, ready to leave old shelves behind. The image pierced me. Endings do not wait for permission. They arrive, swift and unapologetic, while you're still deciding whether to hold on. A gust of wind carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart, stirring memories of the Christmases I once curated to perfection. For decades I had baked, wrapped, hosted and funded, believing that love was measured in the weight of dishes served and gifts exchanged. My son had grown accustomed to it, my daughter-in-law had come to expect it. And I had complied, mistaking service for connection. But as I watched the couple disappear around the corner without a backward glance, a slow heat began to rise beneath the cold. Their sentence inside the cafe, "You won't be coming for Christmas," was meant to diminish me. Instead, it carved a hollow space where something unexpected could grow. I turned toward the parking lot, each breath forming small clouds that dissolved into the pale afternoon. My reflection followed me in darkened shop windows, a 71-year-old woman with silver hair and a spine straighter than it had felt in years. For the first time in a long while, I recognized myself not as a background fixture in their holiday pageant, but as the keeper of my own season. The decision came quietly, like the first snowflake settling on my coat sleeve. I would not plead for inclusion. I would not offer money or meals in exchange for a seat at their table. This year, I would claim a different kind of celebration, one that required no audience, no performance, and no permission. As I unlocked my car, the bookstore lights flickered on behind me, casting a golden glow across the icy pavement. For a moment the reflection of that fading shop framed me in the glass, a solitary figure poised between the comfort of the familiar and the vast unknown ahead. The sight did not frighten me. It steadied me. I slid behind the wheel, exhaled a slow breath, and started the engine. The heater sputtered to life, carrying the faint scent of pine from the wreath I had bought for myself days earlier. In the rearview mirror the town's Christmas tree glimmered like a distant promise, but I no longer felt the pull to gather beneath it. Whatever celebration awaited me would be my own, quiet, deliberate, and finally free. In the quiet that followed, memories arrived uninvited, each one sharp as the winter air. I drove home on autopilot, headlights cutting through the early darkness, but my mind wandered to the years behind me. Years of glittering trees, clinking glasses, and endless lists written in my careful handwriting. I remembered the first Christmas after my husband passed. I had thrown myself into preparations, desperate to keep the family intact. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey, every room glowed with garlands and candles. I bought gifts for everyone, even distant relatives I barely knew, wrapping each package with ribbons that matched the year's color scheme. People praised the decorations, the feast, the thoughtfulness. They didn't notice the exhaustion that settled into my bones as I scrubbed pans long after midnight. That first year set a pattern. Each December became a silent competition against my own memories. The dinners grew larger, the guest list longer. My son, Travis, brought new girlfriends, new friends, and eventually a wife who arrived with designer bags and a camera-ready smile. At first I welcomed her with open arms, eager to show her that love could be built through effort. I shared recipes, offered to babysit, even quietly paid for catering when their plans exceeded their budget. But gratitude was fleeting. What began as offers soon became expectations. The daughter-in-law's compliments, "No one hosts like you, you're amazing," carried the subtle weight of command. Invitations arrived as announcements. "We're all coming to your place, of course." Travis rarely objected. He seemed relieved to let tradition decide for him. I can still picture the countless nights when, after everyone left, I stood alone at the sink. The house that had moments earlier echoed with laughter now hummed with the low sound of running water and my own tired breathing. Stacks of greasy pans leaned precariously against porcelain plates. My back ached, my fingers pruned, and still I scrubbed, knowing that tomorrow I would open my checkbook to cover the hidden costs of a family celebration. Not once did anyone ask if I could afford it, or if I even wanted to continue. I told myself it was love. That love meant giving without question. That sacrifice was proof of devotion. Each Christmas morning, when I saw my grandchildren's eyes light up at the sight of perfectly wrapped presents, I convinced myself the sleepless nights and drained savings were worth it. But love built on exhaustion is brittle. It bends until it breaks. Last year should have been my wake-up call. Marissa, though I never spoke her name aloud in my thoughts, had arrived 2 hours late to dinner, breezing past the kitchen with barely a hello. When dessert came, she announced a surprise trip to Florida for New Year's, already booked and paid for with the generous holiday fund I had quietly provided. The family applauded. No one noticed that I stood at the sink, drying dishes I had washed twice. Driving home from the cafe tonight, those moments replayed in merciless clarity. Every small oversight, every casual demand, every thank you that never came. They formed a pattern as clear as tire tracks in fresh snow. I had given until I disappeared. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had darkened to a deep indigo. I sat in the car for a long while, engine ticking as it cooled, watching the faint glow of Christmas lights blinking from neighboring houses. Their cheerful rhythm felt almost mocking. Inside my own house, the decorations remained boxed in the attic, exactly where I had left them after last year's exhausting spectacle. For the first time, I felt no urge to retrieve them. Something inside me, something quiet but unyielding, began to shift. It was not anger, not even sadness. It was clarity, a clean slice through years of habit. I realized that love is not measured by how much one person can endure. It is measured by mutual care, by respect, by choice. The next holiday would be different. Not because they had excluded me, but because I finally understood the cost of staying included. The night after the cafe meeting, I left the house lights off and let the darkness settle around me. Only the glow from a single table lamp illuminated the small dining room. Outside, the neighborhood twinkled with cheerful decorations, but inside my home the silence felt deliberate, an empty stage waiting for its final act. I carried a stack of unopened mail to the dining table. For weeks I had avoided these envelopes, convincing myself they contained nothing more than routine statements and catalogs. Tonight, I tore them open one by one. Bank statements, credit card bills, old receipts, all the ghosts of Christmas past. Page after page revealed the truth I had refused to name. Every December, the expenses had quietly ballooned. Groceries for 20 guests, catered desserts when my hands gave out, last-minute gifts purchased to avoid embarrassment. The totals at the bottom of each sheet glared like small betrayals. I traced the red numbers with a trembling finger, remembering each meal, each carefully wrapped package, each polite thank you that quickly faded into expectation. I fetched a notebook and began to write. Groceries, decorations, liquor, gifts, electricity, every category received its own line. The pen scratched across the paper like a metronome marking the rhythm of a life spent serving others. When I added the columns, the final figure made my stomach tighten, enough to fund a small vacation every year, enough to repair the leaky roof I had postponed for half a decade. I pushed back from the table and stared at the room that had once been the heart of every holiday. The polished oak surface still bore faint rings from years of wine glasses and hot platters. Above the mantel hung a family portrait taken 5 Christmases ago, everyone smiling, eyes bright. How many of those smiles had been built on my silent generosity? For a long moment I sat motionless, listening to the tick of the wall clock. Then a thought surfaced, simple, undeniable, and terrifying in its clarity. I did not have to do this anymore. I pulled my laptop from its drawer and opened my bank's online portal. The cursor blinked on the screen like a small pulse of possibility. I began transferring savings into a protected account I had opened months earlier but never used. The process required passwords and security codes, each confirmation like a quiet drumbeat of independence. When the final transfer cleared, a soft chime signaled the completion of something far larger than a financial transaction. Next came a different kind of preparation. I opened a blank document and began drafting an email addressed to myself, a record of intentions. No more hosting. No more secret subsidies. No more standing at the sink while others toasted their own comfort. The words appeared on the screen with startling ease, as though they had been waiting beneath my fingertips all along. Midnight crept past. The house remained silent, but inside me a quiet revolution had begun. It wasn't fueled by anger. It was steadied by something stronger, the realization that love without respect is merely obligation wearing a festive disguise. I shut the laptop and looked around the room one last time. The table, the portrait, the neatly stacked envelopes, all seemed to shrink in significance. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of choice settle gently in my hands. This Christmas would not be a battle for inclusion. It would be a declaration of freedom, written not in raised voices but in the calm, unshakable language of action. The following morning arrived wrapped in a pale blue fog. Sunlight slipped weakly across the frosted lawn as I brewed a single cup of coffee. No extra mugs, no frantic rush to prepare for visitors. The world outside moved at its usual December pace, but inside, a quiet urgency pushed me forward. I started with the practical. First, a call to the credit union. My fingers hovered over the keypad before I pressed dial, the sound of each beep echoing like small declarations of independence. A calm representative confirmed the transfer I had made the night before. Her voice carried no judgment, only efficiency, yet every confirmation code felt like a door locking gently behind me. Next, I pulled a small leather address book from the drawer and flipped to a number I hadn't dialed in years. Martin, an old friend and retired attorney, answered on the second ring. We had met decades ago at a community garden and kept in touch through sporadic postcards and the occasional holiday card. His warm baritone filled the line as I explained, in careful terms, that I needed advice about protecting my savings and updating my will. He listened without interruption, then offered a list of steps and the name of a trusted financial planner. No rush, he said, but it's good to have everything in your own name. The phrase settled over me like a protective blanket. That afternoon I met Martin at a retro diner on the edge of town. The chrome counter gleamed under fluorescent lights while holiday music crackled through old speakers. I slid into a vinyl booth across from him, the smell of buttered pancakes and strong coffee mingling in the warm air. Martin, now in his late 70s with a neat salt and pepper beard, greeted me with the easy familiarity of someone who had weathered his own storms. I handed him a folder of documents, bank statements, a copy of my deed, a list of recurring expenses. He reviewed them quietly, his brow furrowing only when he reached the highlighted holiday totals. "You've been carrying this for years," he said softly. It was not a question. We spoke for nearly an hour. I outlined my plan to redirect holiday funds toward long-delayed repairs, to create a small travel account, to update my will so that gifts would be given on my terms, not out of expectation. Martin nodded, offering practical suggestions and a few sharp questions that cut through my lingering hesitation. By the time the waitress refilled our mugs, a new blueprint had taken shape, one built not on sacrifice, but on self-respect. Driving home, I stopped by the credit union to finalize paperwork. The clerk behind the counter wore a cheerful reindeer sweater, oblivious to the quiet revolution unfolding across her desk. I signed each form with a steady hand, watching my signature bloom like frost across the page. Every stroke felt like reclaiming a piece of my own narrative. That evening, as twilight bled into a violet sky, I returned to a house that no longer felt like a burden. Instead of dragging boxes of decorations from the attic, I lit a single candle on the mantel and let the room rest in its natural quiet. The flame flickered against the family portrait, softening the edges of faces once central to every decision. For the first time in decades, I felt no obligation to fill the silence. Independence, I realized, is not loud. It does not arrive with trumpets or dramatic ultimatums. It moves quietly, step by step, through phone calls, signatures, and the steady reclaiming of choices long surrendered. The world outside would continue its cheerful rush toward Christmas, but I no longer needed to keep pace. I was setting a different rhythm, one built on deliberate action and the slow, satisfying beat of freedom. Christmas week arrived draped in heavy snow. The town glittered beneath strings of lights, every shop window advertising cheer, but I moved through the season as though following a private map. For the first time in decades, my calendar held no frantic to-do lists, no grocery runs for 20 guests, no endless late-night wrapping sessions. Instead, a single reservation waited quietly in my inbox, a cabin deep in the pine forest 2 hours north. On the morning of departure, I loaded a modest suitcase into the back of my silver SUV. Inside lay only the essentials, a stack of novels, a wool blanket, a tin of homemade cookies I baked just for myself. The driveway was silent except for the soft hiss of falling snow. As I turned the key and the engine hummed to life, a thrill of nervous excitement rippled through me. This was not escape. This was reclamation. The highway stretched ahead like a clean sheet of paper. Pines heavy with fresh powder lined the road, their branches arching overhead like cathedral beams. I drove without music, letting the rhythmic crunch of tires over snow fill the silence. Each passing mile carried me further from the expectations that had defined my Decembers for decades. As dusk settled, the cabin emerged from a clearing, a sturdy structure of weathered timber and stone, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. Warm light spilled through frosted windows, casting golden rectangles onto the untouched snow. I parked beneath a towering pine and stepped out into the crisp twilight. The air smelled of cedar and distant wood smoke, sharp and clean. Inside, the cabin was simple but inviting. A stone fireplace, thick wool rugs, shelves stacked with books and board games. I lit the fire with a single match, the crackle of kindling echoing in the quiet room. Flames leapt upward, painting the wooden beams in shades of amber. For a long while I stood there, hands outstretched toward the warmth, letting the sound of burning logs replace the chatter of crowded dinners. I unpacked slowly, savoring each deliberate act, placing my novels on the nightstand, folding the blanket at the foot of the bed, arranging cookies in a ceramic dish. Every gesture felt like a declaration. I am here by choice. No one else's schedule, no one else's appetite, no one else's approval. Later, I brewed tea and settled into an armchair near the fire. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in a gentle hush. Through the window I could see the faint shimmer of the frozen lake, moonlight glinting across its surface. A quiet joy spread through me, unfamiliar yet profoundly right. This was Christmas stripped to its essence: warmth, solitude, and the steady heartbeat of my own company. My phone buzzed once on the table. A text from my son lit the screen. "Hope you're staying warm. Merry Christmas." No apology. No invitation. Just a simple acknowledgement that I existed outside their celebration. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying, "Merry Christmas to you too. I'm perfectly warm." Then I switched the phone to silent and returned to the glow of the fire. For the first time in years, I felt no resentment, no longing, no fear of missing out. Freedom, I realized, isn't loud or defiant. It's the soft crackle of a fire in a room you chose for yourself. It's the quiet satisfaction of knowing that this year, and every year that follows, you will no longer sacrifice your peace for someone else's comfort. Christmas morning unfolded like a painting, silent woods draped in white, the lake a sheet of frozen silver reflecting a pale winter sun. I woke without an alarm, wrapped in the scent of cedar and faint smoke from last night's fire. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no clatter of dishes, no frantic last-minute preparations. Just the slow rhythm of my own breath and the soft creak of cabin timbers settling against the cold. I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the world glitter in stillness. A red fox darted across the snow, leaving delicate prints before disappearing into the pines. I thought about all the Christmas mornings I had spent racing against time, basting turkeys, frosting cakes, arranging centerpieces while guests laughed in warm rooms. Those memories no longer carried the sting of exhaustion. They felt distant, like scenes from a play whose script I had finally set aside. A gentle knock startled me. I opened the door to find my son standing on the porch, a dusting of snow on his dark jacket. Beside him, His little daughter clutched a handmade wreath woven from pine and crimson berries. Behind them, his wife lingered a step back, her posture stiff but her eyes softened by the cold. "Merry Christmas, Mom," my son said quietly. His voice held a tremor I hadn't heard since he was a boy. Before I could answer, my granddaughter stepped forward and offered the wreath with small mittened hands. "For you," she whispered. I knelt to accept the gift, the scent of fresh pine rising between us. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady but warm. "Would you like to come in for tea?" My son nodded, relief flickering across his face. The three of them entered the cabin, stamping snow from their boots. I poured steaming mugs and set out the cookies I had baked the night before. The fire crackled softly as we settled around the small wooden table. Conversation began awkwardly, weather, the drive, the snowfall, but slowly eased into something gentler. My granddaughter giggled at the fox tracks outside. My son asked about the books stacked beside my chair. The daughter-in-law, Marissa, though I kept the name only in my thoughts, remained mostly silent. Once, our eyes met across the firelight. There was no apology, no grand gesture, only a subtle shift, a flicker of recognition that boundaries had been drawn and would remain. It was enough. We spent an hour together, no more. When they stood to leave, my son hesitated at the door. "I hope you're happy here," he said softly. "I am," I replied and meant it. After they left, the cabin returned to quiet. But it was no longer the heavy silence of exclusion. It was the gentle hush of a choice honored. I hung the wreath above the fireplace, its crimson berries glowing against the rough stone. It wasn't an invitation back into the old pattern. It was a sign of respect, one that acknowledged both love and distance. As evening settled, I stepped outside onto the porch. The forest lay beneath a sky of scattered stars, each one sharp and unwavering. I breathed in the cold air, feeling it fill me with a calm I had once thought impossible. For the first time in years, Christmas belonged to me, not as a hostess, not as a financier, but as a woman who had learned that love without boundaries is only sacrifice, and that silence, when chosen, can be the most eloquent answer of all. Weeks passed after that quiet Christmas, yet the sense of calm I discovered in the cabin lingered like a low, steady heartbeat. Back in town, January unfolded with its usual gray skies and salted sidewalks, but I walked through the season with a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. The old urgency, the relentless need to organize, to please, to anticipate, had melted away with the snow. I began to notice details I once overlooked. The crisp scent of pine when the wind shifted. The way morning sunlight pooled like honey on the library steps. The laughter of children spilling from the playground near the community center. These small moments had always been there, waiting for me to slow down long enough to see them. One afternoon, while browsing the local bookstore, I lingered near a table stacked with children's classics. A young clerk approached and asked if I might be interested in reading aloud during their weekly story hour. The invitation startled me, but something in his warm smile nudged me forward. I said yes before I could invent an excuse. That Saturday I returned to the shop, a blue hardcover tucked beneath my arm. The reading nook smelled of paper and cinnamon tea, the air alive with quiet anticipation. A circle of children, faces of every shade and background, waited on colorful cushions, their eyes wide and expectant. When I began the story, my voice trembled at first, then settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing. The children leaned closer, giggling at the funny parts, gasping at each twist. Their unfiltered wonder filled the room with a warmth deeper than any roaring fireplace. As I read, I realized that this was what I had always craved. Not the spectacle of grand feasts or the hollow praise of adults, but the simple exchange of presents. Here, love required no elaborate decorations or hidden sacrifices. It lived in the attentive gaze of a child, in the shared silence before a turning page, in the quiet understanding that connection is strongest when freely chosen. Later, as the children filed out with sticky fingers and shy smiles, I stayed behind to help stack chairs and return books to their shelves. The young clerk thanked me and asked if I might come again. I promised I would. Walking home beneath a sky streaked with winter pink, I thought about the word boundaries. For years I had feared it meant closing doors, shutting people out. But in truth, boundaries had opened my life wider than ever before. By stepping away from the demands of those who took without giving, I had stepped toward people and experiences that nourished me in unexpected ways. I understood now that love is not a ledger to be balanced with gifts and favors. It is the freedom to choose where you give your time, your energy, your heart. It is a quiet porch in a snowy forest, a single text answered without resentment, a child's laughter in a bookstore on a gray January afternoon. That Christmas will be remembered not for what I lost, but for what I claimed. The right to define my own happiness, to give without depletion, to stand whole and unhidden inside the life I built for myself. I no longer fear the next holiday season. Whether I spend it alone in a cabin, surrounded by friends, or reading to a roomful of children, it will belong to me. And that, I have learned, is the truest celebration of all. If this story has stirred something inside you, take a quiet moment before you return to the rush of daily life. Think about the traditions you keep, the expectations you carry, and the boundaries you may have let slip away over the years. Have you ever sacrificed your own peace for the comfort of others? Have you ever stayed silent when your heart whispered enough? You don't have to wait for a crisis or an exclusion to reclaim your voice. Boundaries are not walls. They are invitations to healthier connections. They protect the love that deserves to stay and create space for the new joys waiting to find you. Maybe your next step is small. Saying no to a gathering that drains you, choosing a holiday tradition that nourishes rather than exhausts, or simply allowing yourself a day of rest without apology. Freedom begins with a single choice, and it belongs to you. If this story resonates with your own experiences of love, family, and self-discovery, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflections might inspire someone else who is searching for the courage to set their own boundaries. What traditions have you reclaimed? What moments of quiet strength have surprised you? Thank you for spending this time with me. If you'd like more true-to-life tales of love, betrayal, redemption, and unexpected empowerment, subscribe to Silent Boundaries Stories and turn on the notification bell. Each week, a new story awaits, crafted to move you, challenge you, and remind you that the most powerful changes often begin in silence. Remember, the greatest gift you can give this season, and every season, is the freedom to choose a life that honors who you are.